A couple of weeks ago, we spoke to Marie Delafont about masking in relationships. Neurodivergent folks in particular, but really any of us who are so distracted by trying to be what we're supposed to be and trying to cover up what we're actually feeling when we're in like these romantic and sexual situations. And we talked a little bit in that episode about how mindfulness was something of an antidote to that type of masking. And I was just curious if you could walk us through that idea at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, masking, yeah, with neurodivergent shows up a lot. And then if we think of just as a human, we're all just like, how do I not let the parts of myself that I don't like be seen by someone else? That's so vulnerable.
Sure.
But yeah, I like the fact that eventually someone is going to find out. Like we can only mask for so long, anyways. And so
Yeah.
even remembering, like, oh, this is going to somehow be exposed. I'm going to feel vulnerable at some point. Do I want to feel vulnerable and like I've been lying, or just vulnerable? Like, let's go ahead and just like do that part already, And so it is just revealing yourself, and it's uncomfortable, but it's knowing like, oh, that's the discomfort you're supposed to feel, so that you reduce the shame of that, like, part of who you are or what your struggles are or all of that, And so just showing up with that authenticity, and doing the practice of it so that it feels more comfortable. I feel like that's where people get scared of mindfulness too. It's like, oh, that's a great concept, but then they try that, or they try and really just like bring their full selves to the moment, and they're like, so this doesn't feel good.
But I didn't like that moment, so why was I there?
Yeah, I'm going to opt out of that moment.
Yeah.
Mindfulness is stupid. And it's like, oh no, the moment feels uncomfortable because you have not visited ever or in a long time.
Right.
So like, this is how it's supposed to feel, so that it gets to start feeling normal and safe again.
Yeah, yeah, and I know I've said this on the show before, but it stays super relevant because I do a lot of work with folks who have come out of Christianity, and oftentimes that means coming out of a marriage at like a really young age, and now they're finding themselves out in the dating world for kind of the first time, and maybe they're like mid or late 20s or a little bit later than that, and have just no idea how to date. And so often I see this like fixation on getting the second date, on how do I impress, on how do I be who I'm supposed to be. And it, leads to like, I guess, deferring that pain instead of, having that
Yeah,
tension or that awkwardness now. We're just going to try and cover it up until it maybe is worse later.
for sure. And like, people see through us too.
Sure.
Like the
Yeah.
masking ends up being for us. So we have to remind ourselves, like, we're not as convincing as we think we are. And so it's a lot harder to uphold the lie and to try so hard when we're not even getting the results we think that we're getting. It's
Right.
like, I mean, if someone had like a physical thing they were self-conscious about, right? Like, I just don't want someone to see my nose. And so they just act shy or hidden away. It's like, people see your nose. Like, you're
Yeah.
just,
It's there.
that's going to happen. So, I mean, whatever you're going to like, go ahead, be self-conscious, or try and like only look one direction, or whatever you think you can do. But like, it's going to be seen. So,
Yeah. Well, so as we talk about mindfulness, then how do you define that term? Because I feel like it's one of those words that just gets tossed around to the point of almost feeling meaningless sometimes.
yeah, it's paying attention on purpose to the present moment with
Sure.
curiosity and acceptance. And so you're just being with what is. And I think acceptance is the part that throws people sometimes, because it's like, but what if this is a bad situation, or
Sure.
harm's being done or something? And so acceptance is an endorsement. It just means I see what's in front of me, and I accept that this is what the moment is showing me. Not, okay, I guess I love this now. So it's just a lot of that curiosity and being with the moment versus working against it or trying to tell too many stories about it.
Yeah, whether the past is quote good or quote bad, the past is the past. And
Mm,
so, coming to a little bit of acceptance around that doesn't mean, like you said, that you're endorsing it. I like that notion of non-judgment being different from non-preference. Like,
yeah,
we don't
yeah.
have to judge our past or judge our current experiences, but that doesn't mean that we like it, or
Hmm.
that we won't work to change it. I mean, I work to be a non-judgmental person, but I'm also doing shit like this every Thursday night in a hope of trying to change the world because I do have a preference, right, of how things
Yeah.
could be better.
Yeah, for sure. And mindfulness too, some people, it's not they get turned off by it, but can be confused because they're like, oh, I have to be like it's this full-blown lifestyle, or you have to sit and meditate all the time, or that,
Mhm.
there's like some level of commitment where it's like, well, I'm not that type of person. So I guess mindfulness, that's just not me. And it's like, oh no, it's such an informal thing. Like it's just a daily thing. It's how you view life. It's an approach. So it's not some like identity that some people get to be that because they have a quieter mind or a Zen state of being, and then other people don't get to because they're in their heads too much or whatever else. It's just like, oh no, it's a way that you can like interact with the world is mindfully. So not putting that pressure on it of like, oh, if I'm going to be a mindful person, then I have to like do a lot of this extra work.
Yeah. So would it be fair then that like strength would be a relevant metaphor or comparison? Because you might think of yourself as a strong person or not a
Mhm.
strong person, but we all have some degree of strength and we
Yeah.
can like exercise and work that out and make it stronger, whether we are, on one end of the spectrum or the other. There's always
Mhm.
something that we can be doing to increase it and, there might be times in life where we might need a little bit of strength, and there's probably real
Mhm.
value in putting effort into all of that. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I like that. I like that, yeah, analogy with it, and totally, and that it is a good tool to have and to lean into because it helps us in the moment. Mindfulness isn't a fix for any given moment, but it's something that is such a great resource whenever we feel so overwhelmed or
Mm. Yeah.
lost or like this level of discomfort. It's like this home base to return to. So especially if people are in like a phase of their life where they're trying to understand themselves more or confront really difficult emotions, then it's super helpful to try and increase like that skill set and the practice of it.
Yeah, and I just like the notion of it being very much on a spectrum, because like
Hmm.
you said, it's not something that a certain type of person is. I feel like so often people will say, well, I can't meditate. I
Hmm.
can't clear my mind, and therefore I can't, do any kind of mindfulness practice, which I've never met anybody who claimed to be able to clear their mind, not in any sort of like
Yeah.
meaningful, like lasting way at all.
Yeah. If I met that person, I'd be like, you're not interesting to me, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you talked about the mindfulness having these aspects of acceptance and presence and all of these different pieces. What's the relationship then between like mindfulness and shame and self-compassion?
Yeah. I mean, they all go together well. For one, shame, people demonize that a lot of like, how do I get rid of it? And it's like, oh no,
Mm,
that's a human emotion. So it's cool. It's a helpful messenger. So I kind of see it as like shame is the trigger or the cue that there's some part of you that needs care.
mm,
Mindfulness is the skill to uncover what's going on, what's the shame about. And then self-compassion is how you tend to yourself. What does it look like to give yourself care in that moment? So I kind of see like this flow chart of an intense feeling, the ability to look at it clearly, and then the capacity to be with yourself to nurture while you're going through it.
yeah. So I guess the model then is if you have a lot of shame around your sexuality or your sexual
Mm.
identity, and you find yourself in a romantic situation that seems like it might be heating up or turning into sexuality, and that shame is I guess interfering with your mindfulness, like your ability to be present, you're kind of distracted. Your body is perhaps a little bit distracted and responding
Mhm.
to the shame rather than maybe the moment. How does mindfulness, self compassion, like what? How do these tools show up?
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, when things are triggered, is for one, not to like be mad at ourselves, like, oh, fuck, here I go again. Like, I'm having
Oh,
that
sure.
experience, and this is the one I don't want to have. It's like, well, this is where we're at. Shame is what has shown up, so that's what you're going to interact with. You're not going to interact with the, you know, why do I have the past that I did, like this failed part of your self. Like, okay, shame, that's what's up here. And a lot of times we will fixate on something like a specific thing, be it body or performance or whatever, when really we're just humans that want to be loved and accepted. That's what we're scared of in that moment. And then we all have our go to place of like, okay, what's the vehicle for my need to be loved and my fear of rejection? Okay, maybe it's my body's not enough, or I can't perform, or I can't satisfy someone, or this trauma, this thing I've gone through has made me a damaged person.
Mm.
So, kind of calling ourselves out of like to not fixate on that detail, but to know that, oh, underneath it, some part of me wants to deeply be loved and seen in this moment and secure. So, what would it be like to even provide that energy for myself? And it's not like, oh, and then you do that and then you feel great. Like it's a process, and a practice.
Yeah.
But I think we get so lost in like sexual moments and in our head because we keep staying with the wrong subject matter. We
Mm.
get triggered by, I look disgusting right now. What do they think about me? Oh my gosh. Well, now I'm being weird because I'm focusing on this. And now, oh gosh, we're out, and so you get all caught up in these thoughts and you keep thinking, if I can just resolve this thing I'm thinking about, then I won't be having this experience I'm having. But it's like, oh, you're just thinking about that because it's an easier thing for your brain to like analyze than that really like intangible existential thing of, I hope that I'm accepted. And
Mm.
so I think the more we just go back to like, what's my core thing happening right now, then we don't have to stay as fixated on these little details that distract us from just the vulnerability of the moment.
Yeah, I like to describe mindfulness as being very much related to focus, not
Mm,
in the sense that like you need to focus, but more in the sense that you are able to sort of select and be
yes.
mindful and intentional about what you're choosing to put your attention on.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Because we go in like we're experiencing it to such a high degree, whatever our shame is in that moment, right? Our partner, I mean, they might be sensing the effects of our shame, but they're not experiencing the same scrutiny about the thing we're
Hmm.
scrutinizing about ourselves, you know? So it's like, oh, this isn't even what I have to focus on. It's the easiest thing for me to focus on because my brain wants to jump to this shame place, but it's not the only option in this moment. If there were other things to be present with, what else is there? It makes me think a little bit of the like grounding technique. Just I mean, used in therapy all the time,
Hmm.
right? Of like, oh, what are 5 things you see, or sounds that you hear. Like in sexual moments too, remembering like like there can be the narrowing of focus, but then if you're so trapped in it, it's like realize there is a complete picture going on right now. There's so many other things to tend to
The one
versus
thing that
just
you're worked up about and anxious
yeah,
about is probably in context, not the most
yes,
important thing.
exactly.
Yeah, I really enjoy that John Kabat-Zinn quote that I used at the start of the show, which I had to practice like 10 times to not say incorrectly. But that idea that the most important thing to remember is the most important thing. And
Hmm.
that when you find yourself in a maybe stressful, but, important situation, you get to choose what you want to highlight, what you want to put your attention on. And that doesn't need to just happen randomly.
Hmm. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about grounding exercises, but what are some different strategies or ways for like intentionally cultivating mindfulness in like the heat of the moment?
Yeah, well, I do think remembering that there's a full experience, there's another partner, like even
Mm.
curiosity about your partner or partners. And there's a fine line because it's like, oh, yeah, I am curious. I am fucking nervous about what they're thinking in every moment. I'm wondering, it's like, okay, no, that's not curiosity, but like just being tuned into their experience too. So there's a way to like dissipate that energy a little bit. So I think ways to connect with all the aspects of the moment. Uh, Also, naming a feeling, like that's my favorite thing. At least is like if it's going on, it's just going to be trapped in your head, and it's so much easier if you just put something out there of
If
like
if I'm feeling
awkwardness
shame, just
or shame or
labeling that.
something like, just so that it's there and can breathe a little bit, and that can at least open up space for the next moment. Because if not, you're just spiraling in the same repeating moment over and over again in your head,
Mhm.
hoping there's like going to be some exit if you just think through enough, and it doesn't happen because there's no new data coming in at that point. So I think that, and also giving yourself permission to not have a moment be special. There can be that pressure of like, it's supposed to be enjoyable at each moment, or
Mm.
or like this perfectionism with a sexual experience. And it's like, oh, you can also have just a basic moment. Nothing feels special, or you feel a little disconnected, and just like giving yourself a break to just be a human versus a piece of performance art in that
Yeah,
moment.
always striving for every moment to always be the best
Mhm.
moment ever instead of just
Mhm.
having the moment that you're having.
Yeah, and taking on that role mistakenly of like, I am the provider of their experience too. It's like, oh no, they're a co-creator of this moment as well. So you actually don't have as much work as you feel like you have,
Mm.
of tending to yourself, feeling good, and then also making sure they feel a certain way about themselves and a certain way about you. And it's just like, oh wait, like that's too many jobs you've signed up for.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that notion that mindfulness is about just kind of focusing on the one job, like focusing on the
Mhm.
one important thing. What are some kind of daily exercises or routines or some things that you might recommend for just kind of an entry level way of increasing your mindfulness or working out that muscle?
Yeah, well, and I personally prefer informal mindfulness, which does mean you're just going throughout the day and being curious, paying
Sure.
attention to the moment. Sometimes formal mindfulness practice can be helpful for people to get started, because it can be hard to remember to be mindful throughout the day. So if you're like, oh, I'm actually going to follow along with a guided meditation or something, so that you've got the contained space and direction of just witnessing your thoughts and feelings without trying to change them. I think that can be really helpful for someone that just feels overwhelmed
Mm,
by how to be mindful. It's like there's a little bit of structure, so people can incorporate it as part of the routine. I think also it would be like picking tasks that you just slow down for, so that you notice what it's like to be in the experience that you're having, and not slow down for it where it has to be magical. Like this is, I get it a little bit with this idea of mindfulness somehow should infuse each moment with a transcendent quality.
mm,
It's like,
mhm.
no, I mean, that's cool if it happens, but like sometimes you're looking at a beautiful mountain and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a mountain, and that's
Yeah.
okay, right? It doesn't have to be like I'm moved by the spirit. It's just like,
Awe and wonder
it,
and majesty are beautiful emotions, but we don't have to like
yeah,
force them or fake them in order to have like a real experience.
yeah. And so if you're doing the dishes or whatever, like I'm sure plenty of articles you can read online. It's like, oh, mindfulness of daily chores. And there can be this pressure of like, okay, I'm going to be so mindful that there's like gratitude and like, I don't know. Now it's a sensual experience with the dish show, but really it's just like, oh no, it could still be boring, but you're actually, what your hands are doing in that moment. You know what the sensation feels like. You're just getting attuned to all of the like pieces of that moment versus just being on autopilot. So I think you can pick tasks like that where you're like, oh, I'm going to just pay attention to every little piece of this with curiosity. And then sometimes too, like reflecting at the end of the day, I think can be helpful. Like, I mean, throughout the day, ask yourself questions of like, what just happened right there? Or what's the feeling under that feeling?
Mm,
That's a,
mhm.
a good way to notice when we're like telling ourselves stories versus when we're actually in the moment. But
To
that can be
just
tricky.
cultivate some self-awareness by kinda asking
Yeah.
yourself those questions.
Yeah. But if it's hard to remember to do it, if you even have a practice end of the day where you're like, all right, what was the story I was operating from today? Was it the world was against me, or like I'll never be respected, or like people suck, or it's not judging it one way or the other. Like, "Ah, a good person wouldn't think that." It's just noticing it over time, even seeing patterns of like, oh wow, I really operate in this specific way a lot. How is that serving me? What's that about?
Mm, mhm.
So um, any way that you can kind of force yourself to pause and explore that, be it in the moment if you remember it, or if it's hard to remember, setting aside sometime morning, evening to be intentional about kind of reflecting on things.
Yeah, I think that's how acceptance or non-judgment show up here. Because if you don't like these things about yourself, you're less likely to notice them. You're less likely to be
Yeah.
aware of the trends, and you're going to kind of bury them from yourself. But if you're
Hmm.
able to say that I accept these things about myself, then you can be present with them, and that is kind of what gives you the power and the ability to actually do something about it.
100%. Like that's, I'm sure you see this with your clients as well. Like people's biggest issue is they are terrified of parts of themselves. It's not the
Hmm.
part of themselves, you know, it's what happens if I look at it. Will I be consumed by this? You know, will
Hmm.
I spiral into shame?
Am
Do
I
I have to hate
endorsing
myself?
it? Am I making it stronger or saying it's okay?
Yeah, yeah, and also it's like if we see that part of ourselves and we can't change it immediately, then we're like, "Oh god, yeah, then what does that say about me?" So
Mm,
it's people's resistance to just acknowledging like, "Huh, that's a tendency I have." Okay. Like that's where they get more in trouble because you have to expend so much energy controlling that stuff and ignoring it or deflecting it in some way or making up stories to justify that because you don't want to just name it for what it is. You know, like
mm,
a big story for me is that I'm too much. And I also have to acknowledge, like, how do I say this? There's some part where we shouldn't be buying into these stories, right? These are lies that we tell ourselves that keep us stuck. And there's another part where it's like, you know what? I can be a lot. Like
sure.
I just can be. And but I don't have to hate myself for that. Like I didn't there was no clipboard for me to sign up when I was being born of like, hey, which tendency do you want to have? What traits are you gonna have? You know, it's like I don't know. This is just how I learned to respond to the world. And so if I treat myself like that too much feeling is somehow my failure, then yeah, I'm going to run from it, not want to explore it at all. And it's going to actually control me so much more. But if I'm like, you know what? Sometimes that's my tendency. Sometimes I'm not too much, but it's easy for me to think that. I can pause in certain moments and recognize like, am I being a lot right now because I'm afraid of something and it's the only coping mechanism I know? Or like I'm actually fine in this moment. I just feel vulnerable and it's easy for me to tell myself, uh-oh, I'm probably too much because that's just the story that makes sense. So being able to get acquainted with all these different parts of yourself and realize like there's no bad part that you're going to uncover. It's just information. So you get to actually play with it a little bit more.
Well, and that model is just so in contrast to everything that we learn and experience when we grow up in the church, particularly
Mm,
in a very like Catholic or guilt and shame oriented tradition, or in a more evangelical, take every thought captive kind of tradition. There is so much a notion that your thoughts are your sins,
yeah.
and that you are not only responsible for those, but that by paying attention to them, by noticing them, that you are making them worse. And
Mm,
that if you like truly believed that those thoughts would never exist. And so the very fact that you even had that thought says a lot about who you are as a person, or about
mm,
your willingness to be committed to God and to these kinds of things. So I know a lot of these ideas that we're talking about can sound sort of simple on the surface,
mm.
but there's a good reason why it takes so much time and energy
Yeah,
to really integrate them into our lives.
for sure. And it's like we we don't want to see these things because we feel like they're our failure. So I mean, it's pretty good coping strategy, honestly, to be like, you don't exist, or I'm going to demonize this, you know, because
Mm,
we're just like, I don't. Why would I invite the bad in? You know, so it does take a little bit of bravery to be like, okay, can I sit with the discomfort of trying to see this as just a neutral aspect of what it is to be a human versus it having to be some specific personal failing or whatever. It's like for any thought or feeling to show up, it couldn't be there unless a human was capable of having that experience. Like
that common
you're not,
humanity idea.
yeah, you're not so flawed and like special in your brokenness that you have somehow found this dirty, evil, dark spot and then taken it. And now that is your horrible sin. That is your like thing to carry. It's like, oh no, it was in the word bank. Like
Yeah, people have been
that was an
doing that
option.
shit for a long time. You're not special.
Exactly.
Sure.